Live, there's a big old truck rolling by the studio. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. All right, so this morning we're going to be talking about some Supreme Court decisions. But before we get into that, I just got to say I was just looking at some video that I shot when I was running around on my tractor this weekend. I mounted a little gimbal camera on the roll bar on top of the tractor so I could kind of get a little of that FPV over the grapples as I was doing some land clearing, and I learned something from watching that video. I might just need to shave my head. Getting a little thin on top. So it's an old age thing, I guess. So I see Sergeant Major's in there, and so big shout out to Sergeant Major. Yesterday he brought by a brush hog and a box blade for me to hook up to the back of my tractor, and we got quite a bit of good work done with those, and I'm going to get so much. Y'all, I had a revelation. I was out there in them woods running that brush cutter, that brush hog, and moving brush and moving logs and cutting trees, playing with my tractor, playing with the chainsaws and all that good stuff. And it occurred to me, I'm out there driving around on this big piece of equipment that I own, on land that I own, and grinning like an idiot, having a ball, just enjoying the hell out of my time, out there working my own property, and thinking to myself, you know what? There's dudes out there that get paid to do this. And then it occurred to me, I own all this, and the value of it is increasing as I do improvement, as I develop the property. I am getting paid to do this shit. Huzzah! So that's little something that you can smoke in your pipe there. So Be Controversial says, sure takes Rumble a while to load in. B, I'm not sure quite what you're referring to there, but let me know, and I'll take a look and see if there's anything I can do. Any notes I can get to improve the show are always, in fact, welcome. So we're going to start this morning with the White House official statement from whitehouse.gov on the Supreme Court arguments that we just saw. I hope some of y'all saw the short that I published with a little AI rendering of Amy Coney Barrett reading an excerpt from her publication of the majority opinion. We're going to read the White House statement, and we'll go in and discuss what actually just happened. So, big win. Supreme Court ends excessive nationwide injunctions. So from White House counsel David Warrington, today's decision restores the proper separation of powers between the branches of government. Ending nationwide injunctions is a tremendous victory for the American people and the rule of law. So we'll talk a little bit more about what the nationwide or universal injunctions actually meant. But yeah, so he says, no longer can rogue activist judges abuse their authority to dictate the executive powers of the President of the United States, the Supreme Court ruled. A massive victory for the Constitution, the rule of law, and the presidency itself. Since the moment Trump took office, low-level activist judges have been exploiting their positions to kneecap the agenda on which he was overwhelmingly elected. In fact, of the 40 nationwide injunctions filed against President Trump's executive actions in his second term, 35 of them came from just 5 far-left jurisdictions: California, Maryland, Massachusetts, Washington, and the District of Columbia. Now, the Trump administration could promptly proceed with critical action to save the country, like ending birthright citizenship, seizing sanctuary city funding, suspending refugee resettlement, freezing unnecessary funding, stopping taxpayers from funding transgender surgeries, and so much more. So let's clarify a few things about these universal injunctions to begin with. It actually aggravates me that the Supreme Court even had to hear a case on this, right? It aggravates me that we even had to have this discussion. The Constitution is very clear, right? Article 3 lays out the authorities and the powers of the judiciary. And it is very clear. Courts, not just the Supreme Court, but courts generally, judges generally, their authority extends no further than the controversy before them. So what does that mean? That means that, and this next statement is without exception in constitutional law, but that without exception caveat is somewhat complicated and muddled by the findings in Marbury versus Madison, which created the theoretical Supreme Court authority of judicial review. We'll get back to that in just a minute. But that language matters in controversy before the court, before the bench. It means that a judge's order can have no effect on anything external to the exact matter, the exact case before them. For example, let's say that a citizen purchased a product from a company and it was determined that the product was misrepresented, right? Citizen sues the company in court, right? And alleges that he was defrauded. Alleges that he was defrauded through the purchase, right? For example, maybe an old fat white guy buys a hypothetical 2021 Ford Expedition Max Limited from a company called, we'll call them Marvana. And it's delivered with a busted AC, missing running boards, bald unmatched tires, and a transmission that's about to fall out. The truck needs about $15,000 of work in order to be in good serviceable condition. But prior to delivery of the vehicle, there is a no shit 150-point inspection checklist that says this truck works good. In fact, it goes so far as to say that the tires are in good condition because an inspector checked them and they work. The air conditioner is in good condition, works, and has no leaks. The transmission, et cetera, et cetera. Everything has been inspected and is in good, serviceable condition, like new condition. Vehicle's delivered. It's not in that condition. Take it before the court. Court determines not only is it the case that the truck was not in good condition, but on sale, you, the seller, said in writing explicitly that it was in good condition, documented good condition, and it's not. And the court finds that the seller has defrauded the purchaser. Okay. Now, all that, the court may find in that case that with the purchaser having been defrauded, damages are owed to the purchaser to make that citizen whole. That the seller has a legal obligation per issuance of the court to make that purchaser whole and owes some sort of reparation, right? That does not translate to meaning that the seller now has to go back and buy back every vehicle they've sold, has to go back and undo every deal they've ever done, right? In fact, the court does not have the authority to do that. Now, there are exceptions. Sort of. So one exception would be a class action. In a class action, you have to show that there is an example case. I forget the legal term of art for it, but there's a person who represents the class who is the kind of quintessential victim of whatever violation has occurred, right? The original cancer patient, the guy who guy whose wife fell in the hole because all the water was gone and it collapsed under her, like in the show Goliath. The what's her name, that movie with Julia Roberts in it, where she's chasing after the big company for polluting the water stream. There's an example client, right? But then the judges, not the judges, the lawyers have to put together the class. The class is everybody whose case is similar to this one. And then instead of trying the tens or dozens or hundreds or thousands of cases, if you're somebody who actually, yes, Patrick, thank you, Aaron Brockovich, that was that movie. So instead of trying the case, tens, dozens, hundreds, thousands of times, whatever, however many people there are in the class action, they try the case with the representative victim, the representative plaintiff, right? And then the determination is made there. The settlement or the fine or the judgment, right, is assigned not based on what the company owes to the plaintiff, but rather what is owed to the entire class of plaintiffs. Most of you guys out there have probably been part of a class action lawsuit at some point in your life. You may or may not have ever known it. You may or may not have ever gotten anything out of it, right? I've had probably a dozen of these come through my mailbox. I had one with I've had a couple with different wireless carriers over the years where somebody sued them over such and such. I never knew anything about it, and then I get a check in the mail for like $20, right? 15, 20, $30 here and there. The biggest one I had ever seen, I got one. I want to say this was from Singular Wireless after they were acquired by AT&T. I ended up getting a check from some class action lawsuit against them over some complaint about the handling of private materials, something or other. And I never knew the details of the case. And I just got a check in the mail for about $200, like shit, almost 20 years after Singular Wireless no longer existed. Pitt Danny says he's in the Camp Lejeune water case. Well, I wasn't a Marine. So I'm not in that case. But the biggest one that I was ever a part of, I'm sure many of you saw all those ads for the 3M, the lawsuit against 3M for the faulty hearing protection, faulty earplugs. I was a party to that case. Pitt Danny says, I don't think I'll get anything. I don't know, brother. If you've gotten signed onto the case, I got about 10 grand out of the 3M case. A little less than half of that had to go to the lawyers, but I mean, they sure enough sent me a check. And this is a little off topic. For those of you who, for anybody who gets, who might be part of a larger class action like that, y'all stay on your P's and Q's, because I'll tell you what happens in those cases often is they'll identify the class, they'll identify the members of the class, and the lawyers will identify as many people as they possibly can who could be members of the class, and they'll sue on behalf of all of them. They'll try to contact everybody on that list. They will fail to contact a lot of them. But if you're in contact and you fill out the paperwork and you do your part to be involved, then you'll be one of those that gets a check after there's a settlement or a judgment, right? And then what happens? So they proceed with the lawsuit. The judgment's found. The company pays the money. That money goes into a big pot that the lawyers have control of. They take around half of it, and then they subdivide the remainder and distribute that to the individual claimants and litigants that are party to the suit. Well, if you are somebody who's party to the suit and never made contact, they can't get you a check. They can't pay you. So what they do is they pay everybody they can, and then they go back to the pool, whatever's left over after they've paid everybody that actually got in contact. There's a whole chunk that is theoretically they're meant for the rest of the class. Well, some of those people are dead. Some of those people aren't paying attention. Some of those people just there's just no way to get them a check. So they take the remainder, and then they take that and they subdivide it out amongst the people who were actually responded and got paid. So I actually expect to see another $3,000 or $4,000 out of the 3M suit, but probably not for another year or two. I mean, I think it's been 5 years since I first made contact with these guys over this thing. But I say all that, kind of a crash course on class actions. These universal injunctions, they're acting like a class action, but without having a class certified, right? In order to file a class action, you have to certify a class, which means you have to make the case before you even go forward with the suit itself. You have to make the case that you have a class, and for it to be a class, it has to be people with a common concern, a common complaint, and it has to be proved, or at least supported by sufficient evidence that the complaint is one that is valid and has a chance at actually getting through, right? So first you have to certify a class. These judges are treating the law as if the entire population of the United States have the exact identical complaints against the president. And then they're issuing injunctions against the president based on that. Now, the 40 nationwide injunctions that have been filed against President Trump, keep in mind, that's 40 universal injunctions that have been filed against Donald Trump to prevent him from taking executive actions in the 5 months since he was inaugurated for his second administration. That's just in the last 5 months. All 40 of those are in the last 5 months. Right? That's insane. And that's about half of all universal injunctions that have ever been filed. What the Supreme Court has essentially found in the arguments on the case of the universal injunctions, just like I just finished explaining that the Constitution lays out, and this is why it's aggravating that they even had to hear it. The judges have authority over matters before them, over the matter of controversy before the bench. They do not have the authority, over classes of people outside of the controversy before the bench, except in cases where there is a class that is certified for a class action maneuver. They are not doing that. And then they are issuing injunctions on the assumption that the population of the United States qualifies as a class in matters such as determining that Donald Trump doesn't have the authority to remove transgenders from the military, determining that Donald Trump doesn't have the authority to remove illegal aliens from the country, determining that he doesn't have the authority to shut down birthright citizenship. Now, in the case where they've made this decision, the case is specifically, what's the name of the case? It's the Trump versus CASA, CASA, and I forget what CASA stands for. I'll have to look that up later. Let me see if it's right here. Anyway, this case is specifically they were hearing arguments on the universal injunction in Donald Trump versus CASA. Now this is the executive order referring to birthright citizenship. So one of Donald Trump's first executive orders basically says that the birthright citizenship is not a thing, right? Now, the 14th Amendment is pretty clear on this. All persons born or naturalized in the United States on United States soil and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state in which they reside, right? And that subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a very important piece of the clause. Now, the liberals like to point to the case of, what's his name? Ark something, Wing Chung Ark, Wong Kim Ark, United States versus Wong Kim Ark. Wong Kim Ark was born in the United States, but his parents were both foreigners, and the court found that he could be that he was born with birthright citizenship. He was born an American citizen because he was born on U.S. soil, and they like to point to that as the justification for allowing anchor babies in this country. Well, there's an incredibly important distinction here. The original authors, they made it very clear. Look, the 14th Amendment will not convey citizenship to people who are subject to the jurisdiction of foreign nations, such as foreign diplomats or hostile enemies, right? And I would include in that, obviously, hostile foreign invaders, but very clearly, there is absolutely nowhere in law where a court has found that the child of illegal immigrants has upon it conveyed U.S. citizenship by dint of its mere birth on U.S. soil. In the case of Wong Kim Ark, his parents were legal residents, right? They were not citizens, but they were residents, legally domiciled in the United States. They were legal immigrants. Now, frankly, for my taste, I would not extend birthright citizenship even to people like that, except in extraordinary circumstances, right? Because the Wong Kim Ark argument does leave open for the possibility of tourism, birth tourism, but it dramatically curtails it. So citizenship or birth tourism is when a foreigner gets a visa and comes here legally, but on like a vacation visa. Hey, we're rich Chinese people and we're about to pop. Let's fly over to the United States. We'll go to Universal. We'll go to Disney. We'll have a baby and we'll come home. And then that baby grows up in China, comes back here when he's in his early 20s, goes to college, joins the army because he's a citizen after all, never spent any time in the U.S. other than being born until he comes back to join the army, go to college, get, who knows, involved in the upper echelons of the intelligence community or run for office. And all of a sudden you've got a Chinese Communist Party member, dyed in the wool, trained from birth, running for president, and you've finally got something that's worse and more dangerous than Joe Biden in the White House. Now, all that said, in this case, we're talking about birthright citizenship and anchor babies, the children of illegal aliens, hostile foreign invaders. And the law is very clear. And there is nowhere that there is a legal precedent, a court decision of any kind, which confers or conveys citizenship onto the children of illegal aliens. The executive order issued by Donald Trump reiterates that. An injunction, a universal injunction, was placed on that order by a lower court judge. And so the Supreme Court has essentially come to say precisely what it should have said, and that is it is not correct to say that these lower court judges are abusing their authority by using the universal injunctions and overusing the universal injunctions in the way that they have. It is not correct to refer to that as an abuse of their authority, because what the Constitution says and what the justices of the Supreme Court have just opined is that that authority never existed to begin with. This is akin to a police officer knocking on your door without a warrant, demanding entry to your home, and then insisting that he has the legal authority at gunpoint to have sex with your wife. Right? Arrives, right? No warrant. Okay. There are some exceptions, you know, exigent circumstances, etc. There are situations under which the law makes exceptions for the officer to enter your home without a warrant. Okay, fair enough. You can argue that in court, sure. But when he draws his gun and tells you have to watch him have sex with your wife, no intelligent legal mind or layman even could possibly tolerate the idea that that was an authority he had, which he just happens to be abusing in this case. But that's what Democrats do. That's what leftists do. Is they wait until you're not paying attention, or they think that you don't understand something correctly, and then they draw a weapon and they fuck you. Every single time. TPS report says they haven't decided birthright citizenship, but when they do, how is an illegal alien not subject to U.S. jurisdiction when on U.S. soil? So, if you're not subject to U.S. jurisdiction while in the United States, then laws have no meaning, surely. Incorrect. So, to be subject to the jurisdiction means that you are subject, right? You are within the jurisdiction where the requirements of a citizen should fall upon you. Now, the thing about that, the distinction when you're talking about illegal aliens, is that they are subject to a foreign jurisdiction, which means that any actions that person takes, especially those actions, and yes, any actions they take, right? You know, I mean, Alex, just you putting mayonnaise on your French fries, for example, that reflects on you. And right, obviously that's minuscule and insignificant, but it's a thing that can be observed and can reflect upon you. And people can make assumptions about you personally based on that, because that's something that it's not common in the U.S. That's something that that's a European thing, mayonnaise on French fries, especially Spain. Spain and it's either Spain and Italy or Spain and France. They do that pretty commonly. But it's as an example of a very small thing that reflects on you, and from which one can make certain inferences. So when you take that up to the question of breaking the law, as a non-citizen, breaking the law in the U.S., if you're a lawfully present non-citizen, you have agreed to abide by the law. You've signed a document that says you will abide by the law within the U.S. And that's something that has to be taken into consideration, because it may be the case that you do things in the U.S. which are legal here, but are illegal where you come from, or vice versa. And like when I was in Spain at 18 years old, I bought a beer out of every beer vending machine I walked by. Right. But the thing is, when you're subject to the jurisdiction of a foreign nation, let's say Mexico, for example, let's say you're subject to the jurisdiction of a foreign nation that that has extreme religious laws, and those include a prohibition on the use of alcohol, for example. And then you go online and you're drinking beers. You're seen online drinking beers. You're in America where it's legal. You're 21. It's perfectly legal for you to buy and consume alcohol in the United States. Uh, okay, this y'all just broke my train of thought because I got one limey here saying mayonnaise on my fries. I'd deport myself if that were true, and I got another one over here saying chips and mayo is superb. I need to get the two of you on just to argue just to argue that position. Damn! Now you broke my train of thought. Oh, that because you are subject to the jurisdiction of another country, any actions you take here can affect the relationship between the two countries, right? If once you come here, you immigrate, you become a legal resident, you go through the process, you become a citizen. You are now a citizen of the United States and fully subject to the jurisdiction hereof. Then any actions that you take, be it criminal or otherwise, those reflect on this country and do not in any way run the risk of creating an international incident. The thing that people don't seem to be able to get their heads around when we're talking about criminal aliens, illegal aliens, right, illegal immigrants, etc., hostile foreign invaders, the crossing of a sovereign border without authorization is always and everywhere, without exception, an act of war being conducted by the originating nation, right? That's a very, very important distinction. That's a very important distinction, because even if let's say we have a dozen cartel guys coming across the southern border, smuggling drugs into the United States of America. That is perhaps that can be classified legally as an organization, which is not the sovereign nation of Mexico, conducting an intentional organized activity against the United States. But that organization is originated in Mexico, and therefore the international law responsibility of the host nation. If you have an organization within your nation that is conducting activities against the interests of other countries, especially if those activities are significantly damaging, say importing massive quantities of fentanyl, which is absolutely right. This is not me reading intent into it, right? I do not have to say that the current fentanyl crisis is the result of an organized malicious intent to cause great harm to the United States in order to also make the claim that it would qualify as a valid strategic military tactic to achieve that end. Now that it is going on, completely divorced from the question of the intent of the activity, that there is a fentanyl crisis in this country that is claiming dozens of lives at a time. I forget the exact statistics. I think we're losing some 100 people a week or some nonsense to the fentanyl crisis. But completely divorced from whether or not the intent is there, it's absolutely a valid military tactic, a sort of chemical warfare to attack and weaken a population, right? And that means that those involved in the conduct of that activity being the responsibility of a foreign nation are legitimately a rationale available for the declaration of a war between nations. That distinction, when we're talking about hostile foreign invaders, people crossing the border illegally, right? It is always and everywhere an act of war. That's why nobody has birthright citizenship. Except for, I think, New Zealand and one other country. America pretends to have birthright citizenship, or rather the Democrats who want a bunch of cheap labor. Hey, illegal immigrants are great if you're all into stealing elections and slave labor. Yeah, fuck yeah. Where the hell else are you going to find, bodies for the meat grinder of your criminal enterprise? Well, of course, you're going to take the poorest trash dregs you can find that literally nobody cares about, and you're going to use them as a biological weapon to weaken the fortitude and resilience and liberty and prosperity of the host nation. So yeah, bring them on if that's what you're into. You just stuff them into that meat grinder, and yeah, bring them in, stuff them into that meat grinder, and drown all liberty and prosperity in a sea of anatomical confetti. Yeah, I don't know. That's what birthright citizenship is for. Oh. Let's see. Yeah, Pitt Danny says too many Republicans want cheap labor too. Birthright, and Be Controversial says birthright citizenship here is literally something that has been happening without any proper precedence. Yes, there is no Supreme Court precedence to secure birthright citizenship. It is a presumptive argument, and if they ever cite anything, it is the case of Kim Wong Ark, Wong Kim Ark. And that is an illegitimate characterization, because Kim Wong Ark was the child of lawfully present, basically legal immigrants. They weren't citizens. They were still citizens of. They were still Chinese citizens, but they were lawfully present in the United States. They weren't illegal aliens. So I'm gonna have to go ahead and put a. Okay, I've got a comment here from a troll. Let me take a look at this. The argument that something shouldn't exist because it didn't exist originally or in the past without even basic analysis of why something came to be is nothing more than a shallow, fallacious appeal to tradition. Oh, no, I'm not going to bother to address that. A shallow, fallacious appeal to tradition? Okay, got it. So French Cav is someone who doesn't understand what law is. Okay, that's fine. Oh. Okay, and TPS says, so how will SCOTUS rectify this? Trump is already making concessions for farm and restaurant illegal aliens. That's going to complicate this. You are absolutely right. And all I can say on that right now, that's going to be a wait and see thing. Wait and see how that turns out. But I would say I think he's wrong. I think that Donald is making a mistake by doing that. And I think it is not dissimilar to his bump stock mistake. The problem there is that we have, especially because of the presence of hostile foreign invaders as is, we have a great number of problems in this country right now whose repair will require some pain. Right? You know, that you got that, flesh eating disease in your leg, like old Sunnydale did. And here's the thing. You can't just turn the disease off. You got to cut out a chunk of the fucking calf and get on a walker until you've worked your way back up to being able to run and jump like you used to. Um, Pitt Danny says he's pulling back on that. Sergeant Major says Congress must take action. We need a path to legal presence. And honestly, I don't think we need a path to legal presence, Dad. I think what we need right now, beyond deporting every single illegal alien we can find, we need a 5-year moratorium on immigration. All immigration. We need to shut that shit down and clean up. Listen, it's been fun, right? Right? It's been fun. Oma, Opa, we love you. Glad you were here for a few weeks. We had a good time. But I need you to go the fuck home for a little while so I can clean the house. I got work to do. We'll see you next year. Right? That's where we're at. We need to shut down all immigration for, I think, about 5 years to do the trick and clean some shit up. And then, after the China's been polished and put away and all the chairs have been righted and we've wiped down the countertops again, we can invite everybody back over for the Super Bowl. Wings and beer and pizza and chips and dip, and then we'll have to pack it back up. Now, Sergeant Major says, "Oh no, we want the golden visa." You know what? Fair play. I'd be thrilled if we went golden visa and no other immigration. You want to buy a golden visa? Awesome. That's so you can give the United States a big fat chunk of money toward paying down the U.S. debt, and then come on over here with your big fat wad of money and open a business for which only natural-born American citizens are available for employment. That'd be fantastic. All right. Now, all that, I am going to have to button this one up. Y'all go check out the short. Amy Coney Barrett. I didn't even get into Ketanji Brown Jackson this morning. Amy Coney Barrett. Maybe we'll talk about that more a little bit later. But we talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the special Saturday night. And I believe these court decisions are going to be something that are going to keep us having conversations for at least a few more days off and on. But I'm going to have to go ahead and put a pin in it there because I've got to go to Dublin today. Holy shit. If y'all happen to be in Dublin, look for the big man in the Hawaiian shirt. Come say hey. And we love you, and we will see you tomorrow. There's the button.